All right. Hi, Peter. Hi, Lisa.
Morning.
Thank you so much for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. It is February 9th. I just wanted to go over two quick things before we got our discussion started. The first is I'm just giving you, the heads up right now that I'll be recording this conversation. The recording's begun, and after it's completed, the discussion, I'll be posting the conversation to YouTube, to our YouTube channel. Is that okay with you, both of you?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, great. And then from there, just the last thing I wanted to bring up quickly here at Vonvo, we're all about valuable conversations. We want our discussions to be both civil and respectful. We don't want there to be any personal attacks against one another. Are you both okay with those ground rules?
Yes.
All right, great. So then let's get started. Um, we're here to talk about gun control in America. Peter, would you mind just giving our viewers who are in the audience right now, I see a few, would you mind just giving them a bit of insight into a quick background of yourself, and then Lisa, you could go ahead.
Well, as I was saying while we were off camera there, I'm originally from Chicago. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, in what is now the community that Obama happens to have his home, and went to university in Boston. Certainly, with respect to firearms, one of the things that touched me quite seriously was by the time I was 25, I had known more people who had died as a result of a firearm incident than I did from any disease or accident.
Great. Okay.
Lisa, over to you.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay. Well, my experience is different. Growing up in North Carolina, everybody I knew had a handgun, shotgun, for whatever the reasons were. Some were just because they were pretty. Pearl-handled handguns. I have not experienced any shooting in my lifetime other than men who have killed themselves, suicide.
I'm sorry, Lisa. Men other
Men who have committed suicide.
than okay.
That's the only time I've ever experienced any form of shootings other than hunting.
Right.
And I own 3 firearms myself, a Ruger, a Beretta, and a 20 gauge shotgun. I'll be taking my concealed weapons class the end of this month, even though I don't need it here in Arizona. I felt like I needed that training. I've been trained on my handguns, and I'll head to the indoor range this afternoon to practice.
Great. So, Peter, what I was just going to ask, and for both of you, so can you just quickly describe, what exactly got you, so passionate about this topic? Was it the people that you knew that, particularly died while you were in Chicago, or was there anything else that got you really passionate about this issue?
It's a combination. It's definitely a combination of things. I mean, several very intelligent and attractive people that I knew as a youth were victims of gun violence. One was the daughter of Joe Louis, who was the boxer, who was a classmate a year or so older than I was, who had the misfortune of marrying a drug dealer and was caught in a dispute there. Others have been just friends and acquaintances mostly. I have a cousin who committed suicide as well, and that was certainly very distressing for the family in general, and his family in specific. It had a devastating effect on his family. And then over the years, at different times, as we were talking before, I'm now a resident of Canada. That has more to do with work than anything else. And I ended up being involved to some degree during the period of time that Canada was trying to put in their gun registration and involved in a political movement at that time and dealing with more with the conservative side and the people that were promoting standing up against that. And I, for one, was for that idea. Some form of record keeping doesn't strike me as being at all tyrannical. It's more functional than anything else. In any event, got into a number of debates there and was surprised by the aggressive nature of the argument against registration. And then more recently, of course, the events at Sandy Hook are very touching. And to some degree, it's a little bit like the baby seal event with respect to fur coats. It's a very dynamic, clarion kind of call to the public, albeit that it's white children as opposed to black children and all those issues that come up from a political perspective. But it's one of those events that says, wait a minute, perhaps we've allowed this particular right to expand beyond its boundaries, in that you can't stop that kind of event, but you can certainly minimize the probability in a variety of different ways.
Great. And Lisa, how about yourself? Is anything that really got you passionate about this?
Well, I believe that it is my inalienable right to own a firearm. And if you are trained and know how to use that firearm, and it includes an automatic weapon, then so be it. Personally, for me, I do not know how to use an automatic weapon and have no desire for that. What I do have, I feel, is for the protection of myself and my family. But I think that registering the firearms, I'm not so much opposed to that as maybe some are. I register them, that's fine. But if I buy something at a gun show, I shouldn't have to jump through hoops to get it registered. So be it. If I want to trade guns with a neighbor or purchase something that he has, that should be the end of it. It should be between us, nobody else's business. My problem with registration, I think back to things that people have told me about when I have a friend that's from Holland, and when they took their weapons, and it was just a very scary time. They seem to be more acclimated to it now, but I would be willing to fight my government if they decided to force me to register or declare what I owned and try to take my weapon.
I gotcha. Peter, go ahead. Did you have something that you wanted to ask Lisa?
Max. I was just going to respond. I think if you pay attention to the debate and not to the media, but to the actual debate, to the various parties that are speaking to this, you'll find that the majority of them, first of all, there is no interest whatsoever in coming and confiscating anybody's guns. That's not part of the equation. Even if there were an assault, the so-called assault weapons ban, that would be on future sales. All of the existing would still be grandfathered, is my understanding and interpretation of the information. So it's the issue that I would kind of like to find ways to discuss here is, where is the common ground between your interest in owning guns, and I see in your circumstance, being aware in our conversation of what you own, that you are what would qualify as a responsible firearm owner, and your interest is in the sport of range shooting and those things, and your inalienable right to self-defense of your home. That's apparent by your selection of firearms. I come from a different background and setting where in the one circumstance there is a proliferation of firearms. And how do we address that problem? Because in the idea of background checks is not to impose upon you as an individual as much as to eliminate those individuals who are accessing firearms either through straw buyers at gun shows or are accessing them in other manners. I mean, I heard recently that up to 10% of the guns in Chicago come from Mississippi. And in the city of Chicago itself, they are confiscating 6 times the number of firearms that they are in New York.
Right.
So it's a very porous environment, and the question is, how do we reduce that?
Okay. Lisa, do you have a response to that?
Well, as he's talking, so many things are going through my mind. And I want to go back to one thing that he said earlier, and that was that Sandy Hook had an impact on him as well. And I don't know what gun law could have been in place to stop Sandy Hook. Because from what I understand, this young man didn't own the weapon that he obtained because of his mother. And so it wasn't anyone's irresponsibility but his and hers. It wasn't, how could any law have stopped it?
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you on that, Lisa, but I think one of the points that comes up with respect to Sandy Hook, it does have something to do about storage and those issues. But one of the points that comes up about Sandy Hook and the other, I'll call them rampage killings of the last several years, is that there has been a distinct increase in the number of those events. There's a series of cause and effect that's taking place. One of the issues that I'm quite aware of and quite upset about, in fact, is that the NRA, beyond its initial purpose of being a target, improving the marksmanship and safety of firearm owners, has become a much more vocal entity. I've lost the screen here. A much more vocal entity in their involvement, and they have politically had an impact on the ATF, the Center of Disease Control, and the FBI in terms of how they research and maintain data. So people that are looking at the problem of rampage shootings or suicide or any of these other issues are hamstrung because they can't access appropriate information and resources. When you do your background check right now, the ATF is forced to do it on paper. Here we are in a time where we've got the computer technology that the three of us, thousands of miles apart from each other, communicate. And yet, if you go to register your or go do your background check at a gun shop, they have to actually do that on paper, and that's ridiculous.
Well, and all of my weapons were purchased at a gun shop, and I did have my background check done. And the first one went through smooth. When I went to get my shotgun, they delayed me. And I'm like, what? Why did I get delayed? Well, then a couple of days later, I was cleared. And then when I purchased the next weapon, there was no delay. So I'm not sure, what the delay was, but everything must be done on paper and very specific. And I don't have a problem with that. I really don't. But if I went to a gun show in Tucson and wanted to get a weapon, it should be no big deal. I truly believe that. But the criminal, if they want a felon, if they want that weapon, they're going to get the weapon, whether it's a gun show or break into somebody's house.
Right. So can I just, I wanted to just step in here. So what I was going to ask both of you is when it comes to this, like all, you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, it's a little soft,
Okay.
but
Sorry, I'll come close to my.
I'll put it up a bit again here and
Okay.
see if it echoes.
Yeah. What I was gonna say is when you're talking about this issue, there seems to be like some people who are trying to have this one size fits all solution, and then like you kind of hear people going back and forth trying to like distinguish: is this a violence problem or is it a gun control problem? Is it automatic weapons or a personal handguns issue? Is it right to our Second Amendment or background checks that prevent you just having an open arena to just purchase guns and putting more restrictions. So I guess my question to you guys is in order to try and come up with some solutions to this problem, is it a matter of like defining these individual problems first? I mean, is it all under this gun control in America problem, or are we talking about like a few different major problems that kind of need to be solved individually? What are your guys' takes on that? And I guess Peter, if you want to go first, that this seems to be working so far.
I certainly don't believe that it's a one-size-fits-all scenario. I think, and I also believe that quite a bit of it has actually absolutely nothing to do with the firearms themselves. That there's issues like education, and employment, and economics, and the mental health questions that have been raised. I think it's a question of finding the balance, first off. Second, of establishing in the American psyche that there is indeed an illness with respect to firearms. That illness is reflected in the criminal activity. That illness is reflected in the suicide activity. That illness is reflected in the fact that there's almost one small arm for every American alive at present. And less than 40% of the population or 48% of the population, depending on the demographic of male-female, own a firearm. I'll point out that in Lisa's comments, she referred to them as weapons. I refer to them as tools. What I'm interested in establishing is what do we do when a tool becomes a weapon? At that intersection between a firearm being something that's protected by the Second Amendment, something that exists in a rural setting for control of rodents and for hunting and those situations, something that exists in a home for the purpose of self-defense, which of course does make it a weapon, but it's there specifically under the Supreme Court decision on Heller. But there is a point at which a firearm as a tool transfers over to become a weapon. The accessibility issue for criminals to access the firearms is certainly a serious issue. If we can find different methods, and it's a combination of laws and legislation, both on the federal and local levels, as well as improved education opportunities for those communities, as well as improved economic situations in those communities, various different things. It covers a broad range of political issues, of which I suspect, Lisa, you and I are on opposite sides. But my sense of it is you feed the underbelly of society and you reduce the problems caused by the underbelly of society. And so it's a case of finding the balance across the board. I'll use the figures from 2011 because those are the ones I know off the top of my head. It's 31,513 people died as a result of a firearm-related event in that year, according to the CDC. In addition to that, about 240,000 people were injured. They were either victims of a shooting, they were wounded by a ricochet, they were accidental shootings, whatever the circumstances are. And of those, half of them experienced extended stay in hospital, and some of them are like the member of Congress who as a 16-year-old was accidentally wounded when visiting a police station and is confined for the rest of his life in a wheelchair. So that has a tremendous economic impact in terms of lost manpower and various other things. So it covers a fairly broad, in my view, range of things. Very little of which has to do with Lisa and the guns that she has in her home or any of these other firearm owners, and more that has to do with the pervasive nature of guns in society in general.
Okay, great. Lisa, what were your
I
thoughts?
want to start by saying that in the neighborhood I live in, I've told you before, we have many retired law enforcement, many retired military, and I know these gentlemen have assault weapons. They told me they do, and the women. um, and I feel very safe here.
I'm sure you do.
I know the responsible people, they know how to use their weapons, and that for me has been very comforting. I know that when I have to leave my father, that people are paying attention. I know that when I'm in the home with him, that my neighbors know that I'm safe. And furthermore, I am 25, 30 miles from the border. I see Madeira Canyon from my back window, and I've seen the people crossing the border. I don't know what those people have on them. A truck turned over recently here, and the bales of marijuana from Mexico spilled out of it, and the men took off. No doubt those men had weapons. If they came towards my home, towards our neighborhood, even though we are very suburban, um, we are in these closed communities with walls around us. I don't know if you've seen how they do these homes here in Arizona, but anyways, um, they would get in here, and I just don't know what would happen. But knowing that I am surrounded by responsible people is very comforting. And I don't feel that anyone has the right to take that away from us. And
I don't think anyone is.
Finish your point,
I would
Lisa.
not be willing to give my weapon up.
Okay. And I don't think anybody is advocating. I don't believe in the spirit of the Supreme Court decision on Heller that anybody is advocating taking away your ability to self-defend your home, or in the case of experiencing a situation where you feel lethal force is present and a threat, removing your ability to do that. That I don't believe is what the conversation is about.
Go ahead.
Start messing with the Constitution. It says we have the right to bear arms. It made no stipulations to that whatsoever. And
okay.
If you start chipping away at the freedom, when do you stop?
That's a facile argument, I'm afraid, Lisa. I mean, I've got quite a bit of knowledge about the First Amendment, which is also an unabridged right. But in fact, there are limitations on the First Amendment. I cannot go stand in the middle of. I couldn't walk into the Aurora Theater, for example, and yell fire. It's against the law. I cannot libel you or make statements of slander without being potentially brought to court on a liability lawsuit. There are limitations as to what I can do. There is a certain level of freedom of the press, but within that, I can't espouse hate speech and various different things. There are limitations upon constitutional rights. Those limitations are reasonable, and I think that one of the phobias among the pro-gun lobby is, first of all, it's being generated by false information. But I think one of the phobias is this idea that there's going to be some repeal of the Second Amendment. No one is advocating that. You have the absolute right to self-defense. That has been established by the Supreme Court. It didn't exist before 2008, but it does exist now.
Right.
And unless there's a future Supreme Court decision that overturns that, your home and your use of a firearm within your home for the purposes of self-protection and self-defense is completely protected and not an issue. It's not a question.
Right.
I'm going to go back to your comments about people coming across the border from Mexico. It's certainly one of the issues, and it addresses Max's original question. And you've got 52. You've got the country of of a wide variety. You've got areas like Alaska, which are rural and wild, and you've got areas like Phoenix, which are which are open and have vulnerable populations in terms of the elderly. You've got the criminal events with the drug trade in Mexico for sure. You've got areas like Chicago where the violence is what it is. You've got other parts of the country where it's perfectly peaceful and no issues at all. And it covers a broad range of variables from one to the other. But one of the realities that I've noticed in looking at all these statistics, if it's not homicide in a community, it's suicide. The numbers of people who are being injured and dying as a result of firearms are such. Now, some people will argue, well, that's the same as cars. Well, if you're going to take that argument, then I'll put forward the argument that you're licensed to drive a car, you have insurance when you drive a car, your cars, every car you own is. So it is an unreasonable, I mean, I understand the idea of, gee, I don't want them to know what I have because I'm afraid of the government. We're in a democracy. You and I and Max and all these people that are watching what we're saying here are the government.
Peter, let's
the power resides with us.
Let's let Lisa go ahead and respond, and then take your time. And then there's been some people who have been submitting some comments inside the text chat that I want.
Question about background checks.
Yeah. So Lisa, go ahead and respond with whatever you'd like.
But we're in a republic. We're in a republic. Yes. Okay. And I still truly believe that this is just one more way to chip away at our freedom. And you said yourself, unless the Supreme Court makes various decisions, what if they do? If they did?
Well, then that's the government.
I know. And I will, no matter what, I will not, if the law is unjust, then I will not accept that law.
That's a choice that you make. The reality of it is that in the future, should the Supreme Court make a decision that affects the Heller decision adversely in some form towards self-defense, which is unlikely. If you study the activities of the court, and the Dred Scott decision, which was a decision that supported slavery, took several generations to disappear. The fact of the matter is that the same Constitution which you're holding up to say that I have this unalienable right on one issue is the same structure, and what is amazing about it is that the structure exists so that over time the document the circumstances around the document can address the issues that exist at the time. So we have a variety of issues that come up that get addressed by the structure of the balance of three divisions of government, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. And we're going through that process now. I want to point out to you with respect to the concern about tyranny and all of these ridiculous, if you will, rumors in the public, that had a completely peaceful transition of power in 2000 when Bush came to office in a highly contested election. So there is absolutely no basis other than the fact that perhaps for a certain element of society, the current administration isn't somebody they like. But there's absolutely no basis for that perspective. I happened to visit your page and I noticed you had a post about when Hitler confiscated the guns. That is a patently false piece of history that somebody's put out. I happen to have studied pre-Second World War Germany quite intensely on a project a number of years ago. Hitler came to power by seizing power in a weak republic of the time. That republic was weak because of the constraints of the Versailles Treaty. It had nothing to do with the structure of Germany. It had to do with the structure imposed on Germany by foreign powers. Hitler came to power. As soon as he was elected to power, he seized power in a coup. He, in fact, loosened up the gun laws.
Didn't the people have to hide their weapons, their firearms from the government?
Which in Germany?
Yes.
The Germans supported Hitler. So, no, they didn't. The Jews were the ones that suffered under Hitler and the other people that he didn't care for. But let's not
Yeah,
get
yeah.
into that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a different.
We could save that discussion for another time. Lisa, what I wanted
Yeah,
to
we can
ask.
do that another day.
Lisa, what I wanted to ask you about is one of our viewers. He wanted to get both of your stances on, background checks. And so I guess my question to you would be is, one, give us your take on background checks, but then, and I guess like let's say, mainstream, across the board, like everyone's entitled to the same background checks. It's not like you get one background check if you buy a gun in Walmart and another background check if you buy it at a private gun show. So I want to get your take on that, and then also just like explain if you think that, let's say, having across the board background checks, if you believe that that would be impeding on your Second Amendment right, or if that doesn't necessarily turn you off.
Earlier I was saying I don't personally have a problem with the background check. I've gone through them, and I personally just don't have a problem with it. I know that there are going to be criminals who are going to try to purchase weapons. Um, the policy I purchased at the Second Amendment uh, store in Tucson, and they make you actually pay for your weapons before the background check, and then if you're denied, they keep 8% of your money. So to me, that was a pretty good policy to deter people from trying to get a weapon when they're not going to pass the background check. If I go to a gun show and a background check is not required, that's no big deal. I should not have to go through an additional step to register my weapon, my firearm. As I said earlier, if I wish to trade with my neighbor or purchase something from my neighbor, I shouldn't have to tell anyone about it. So while I don't care about a background check, if I have a firearm and it's not registered, that's no big deal either. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's more than fine. Yeah,
Okay.
Peter, what's
and
your?
I wanted
Yeah,
to
go
say
ahead.
something about the
Go.
suicide. I know many, unfortunately, many men who have committed suicide, and they did not commit suicide with assault rifles. Each one that I know of, they committed suicide with a shotgun, and it was their hunting weapon.
I don't think the issue, Lisa, to be fair to your concern there, certainly from my perspective, and I believe I represent a good portion of the voice on we need to address the issue. It's not about specific weapons. There are people that are very concerned about specific weapons. The more I've looked into this, I mean the assault rifle that's being referred to in general is basically a toy gun. It is a firearm that is designed to look like the real thing. Some of the issues that do surround it are, can it be turned into a fully automatic weapon? And if that's the case, then there needs to be restrictions on that type of weapon. I have a greater concern, rather than assault weapons, I have a serious concern about guns that look like toys. We talked earlier. I'll get back to the background issue, Max, for you, but I want to just sort of respond to this with Lisa. I mean, there was a 3-year-old just the other day who died because he picked up his mother's handgun, which was pink. There are guns that look like Hello Kitty toys. They look like squirt guns. And I recall that there's a prohibition on toy manufacturers wherein they cannot produce toys that look like real guns. Why is an industry producing real guns that look like toys? It's those kinds of they might be a border issue. It might only be a few thousand items to begin with, but that's inviting an accident. That's inviting an event. The gentlemen that are committing suicide with shotguns, and I'm aware that that's a likely use or handgun more than the others. and that handguns are the prevalent crime gun. That's all part of this. There are other elements to the discussion, and that has to do with depression, and that has to do with economics, and that has to do with health in general, and a variety of things. People are going to commit suicide. We're not going to stop people from committing suicide. There are going to be rampage killings. We're not going to stop everybody from doing that. There are going to be bank robberies. There are going to be drug trade and arguments and various things. But what is being missed by those people that are on the pro-gun side is they're saying, I have this inalienable right to this and don't infringe on my rights. But I think the one father from Sandy Hook in his testimony in front of the Connecticut legislature made a very valid point, and Jefferson would support this point, I believe, in that the sequence of life, liberty, and happiness as expressed in the Declaration of Independence, those rights are in a specific order for a specific reason. Your liberty to own a firearm is behind my right and anybody else's right to life. And it's a very narrow legal concept. But those 20 children in Connecticut, the 550 people or 19 people that died in Chicago last year, all of those people have a right to life. Whether or not we can do enough to reduce those numbers is what the discussion is about. It's not about taking your gun or somebody else's gun. In addressing the background check, absolutely, universal, no question. You go sell a car, Lisa, you have to transfer title of that car. You do it every time you do it. There's no, and it's part of the system, and nobody's coming to confiscate your car. It falls within that category. There is a phobia in the country that is totally and completely and absolutely out there. It's just a complete facile phobia. The government is not coming to take anything from anybody. The government exists, and I again go back to the fact that we're a republic. Every couple of years, every year in some communities, we are having elections. We keep changing who's in power. Various rules, different things. All of these concealed weapon states that currently exist. At some point in time, the stand your ground presence of law will be challenged in the court on a liability because an event will have taken place where it was not justifiable homicide. And that law will be adjusted. Then what happens is our laws go through a long conversation. It travels at a much different pace than what our political debate goes. So we have our states in their political debate, their various laws, much of which I think some of the stuff coming up is quite silly. They are protesting by putting together rather silly laws in order to create the court challenges that help in the future to define what the law actually is. So the phobia about governments taking guns is unrealistic. I mean, if you don't like Obama, he's going to be gone in 4 years. There'll be somebody else, whether he's Republican or Democrat, or he or she, white, black, or green. That'll be determined when we get there, right?
Right.
They're not coming for you. They're not going to do that.
So,
Max, you look like you have a question.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask a question. Unless Lisa, do you have a response that you wanted to provide? Otherwise, I'll ask another question.
No, but I am going to have to go shortly as my father is awake. But I just want to say that I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I will be holding tight to my weapons.
And so you should.
And I'm sorry. But thank you, and I appreciate your insight, Peter.
Well, I think it's important. If we get an opportunity to do this again, Lisa, I think it's important that what we spend our time on is finding the common ground. I mean, I appreciate that it's an inconvenience for you to deal with background checks in a gun show. I understand from some of the reading I've done, if for example, if you have a family member that you wanted to transfer a weapon to, that is not subject to the universal background check. I think there are ways in which that can be dealt with relatively simply with respect to licensing and a variety of bureaucratic issues. I mean, there'll be those people that will scream big government, but at the end of the day, what we are looking to accomplish is a reduction in the it's not an astronomical number, but it's a significant number of people that are dying or suffering as a result of excessive available firearms.
And how is a registered weapon going to stop any form of crime? And as you said, the ATF is all about paperwork, and not even within our century as far as how to do the background check.
Well, that's part of what needs to be addressed. That's part of what needs to be addressed. I mean, one of the suggestions that I've seen on the website that I have with respect to this issue, somebody suggested that the manufacturer be obliged to fire each weapon into a barrel, and the signature of that particular barrel and weapon recorded, and that with the data management that we have now with computers would be a relatively simple system, somewhat like fingerprints, so that they start a library of all of that kind of stuff. Another suggestion has been that the ammunition itself, each box of ammunition, have a unique serial number, and that can be embedded without impinging in any way in the ammunition. It may make it more expensive, but there are the fact of the matter is that with the paper records that exist now, it has to become computerized. That's something that Obama has already put in place with his executive orders, something to that effect, because those are riders that were put on other laws to deny them the money to do what they needed to do.
Right. What good is all of that going to do? What good is it?
What it does is it creates a net. What it does is it creates a net. As you said yourself, and I don't necessarily agree with the idea that you go to buy a weapon and you have to leave a deposit on the table when you do your background check, and if you don't clear the background check, you don't get a nickel of your deposit back. I mean, that's an interesting concept. Nobody has proposed that I'm aware of, but that in and of itself may prove to be an impediment. But what the background check does allow is, let's say I go to 7 gun shows and buy 7 different weapons as a straw buyer, right? I'm perfectly respectable. I have no criminal record. It does allow for the system to go, wait a minute, this fellow's buying too many weepons.
What's too many?
Well, Lisa, can I ask you a quick question? Because you asked the question, like, what's too many? Do you think that, like, I have friends that, collect sneakers. Like, they love sneakers and they have 60, 70 pairs of sneakers. Do you think, though, like, obviously you look at something like sneakers, then you look at something like guns. Do you think that they really should be held on the same level, and that, like, because one is capable of killing people and the other is just like something you wear in your shoes? Like, do you think that they should be held?
What about people who collect knives? I know people who have huge knife collections.
Right. No, I mean it's a great debate.
Are we gonna register them as well?
Well, I guess by the way, like, I'm not, just so you know, I'm not trying to choose sides by any means. I guess, though, it's like just an interesting question that I wanted to pose, because I think it's a great question to be asking. Like, do we have to? I think do you think that it's possible that if the government's not trying to take away your weapons, but is just trying to make what these things are, which they are pretty dangerous, in terms of what they can do. Just taking a step outside of, like, your initial comfort zone. Like, do you think that these things, that these tools, weapons, whatever you want to call them, that need to be held, if they're going to be personally owned, they need to be held with real responsibility. The fact that the amount of responsibility that's needed to own one of these things versus a pair of sneakers, and the fact that they can cause damage, therefore, it should be held in a different respect than sneakers and potentially from knives. I mean, do you see where people come from with that argument, Lisa?
I can see that, but who is to say what is too many for a person who does enjoy collecting?
I think what happens, you end up, one of the issues that's going to arrive with this at a later date is going to be the bureaucracy of it, I mean, and that was what in Canada became the big bugaboo
And
with respect to it.
well, that's like with you saying actually put codes on the ammo. I'm like, what? You know,
They're looking at that in
that's just
California.
more
And it's
regulation.
actually,
You said it would cost more. You know, why should it have to
potentially
cost more?
They have now the radio tag technology that they're putting into clothing. It's no different than I would expect with firearms.
Then you should have the choice.
I
can't afford radio tag clothing.
Well, but you do every time you go to Walmart. They know what you're buying. I mean, I find it quite interesting that we're worried about whether or not they know whether we own guns. And every time you use a variety of club cards in your shopping, they know exactly what you're buying. They know what you're doing with respect to the internet and various different things because the records are kept. That doesn't mean somebody's looking at it, but they have access to that information should they want it.
Correct. It's data. It's
how many is too many.
It's
Sorry, Max?
So basically, you're saying that which is interesting, that the idea behind just using similar forms of data collection in rewards cards at Walmart and Foot Locker and different programs like that, you think that the same sort of tracking and data collection should be occurring with guns? And Lisa, would you agree?
I don't think that's a proposal that's in front of California.
Do you think that makes sense, Lisa, or no?
Well, I'm not. What I'm saying is, I'm looking at what the options are that are being put on the table.
Right.
One of the options that's being put on the table is a proposal out of California that is to tag the ammunition per box in order to track where it was bought, where it was used. One of the things that happens with that is that if they see the acquisition of what law enforcement determines is too much ammunition, they might find justification to come and talk to the various parties involved and see where that goes. What I'm saying with respect to the technology, and I see Jeff's got a number of comments down here addressed to me, and I'll try to respond to some of those. But there is technology, whether it is specifically the technology of one form or another. I believe a technology exists now where it would be relatively simple to tag that material. That's going to add marginally to the expense. Obviously, it can't be prohibitive, but technology being what it is, it's going to be if they can produce radio tags to put into clothing and it doesn't add $10 to your shirt, they can certainly produce something to tag your weapons, or your firearms, to tag. There's all kinds of different ways the stuff can be tracked, and in the future, it's inevitable, because that's the way the marketing aspect of things is going. Going back to the question of what is too many guns, in Canada here, there is a specific regulation with respect to real estate. Any real estate transaction where a deposit is made in cash or cash is used in a transaction has to be recorded, has to be reported. You have to have the identification of the different parties. It's called FinTrack. What the government is putting in place is a way in which to discourage money laundering, because real estate is one of the great ways to launder money. It's no different because straw buyers are involved in those transactions. With respect to background checks, it's really no different with firearms. Individual people are being used, sometimes not aware. Here, I'll give you $50 if you go do this kind of thing. Individual people are being used to that. What the effort is with respect to background checks isn't to impose upon you as a legal, law-abiding individual who's a good credit rating, if you will, as far as a background check goes. It is to turn off the tap. I mean, if Chicago can reduce the number of firearms in Chicago, if a criminal can't access a firearm, it's not going to be used to kill a 15-year-old that in front of the president the week before. It's not going to be used to kill, a 45-year-old street crossing guard, right? It's not going to be fired into the air on New Year's Day and kill a 10-year-old standing on her aunt's porch. There are a number of ways. We have the circumstance. I mean, there are so many different situations that are coming up that it's very heartfelt if you start studying each one of these fatalities in one form or another.
Right.
The Los Angeles policeman that's currently running around rogue. I mean, here's a perfectly qualified, theoretically normal individual who's gone, and he's a tremendous threat at the present. Now, some forensic study of that in the future may determine some of the different causes that brought that about, and there may be some red flags that we can learn from a study. Those studies have to be financed. That's one of the issues with the ATF and the CDC and the FBI in the interference in their funding through Congress by putting riders that are not related to the laws that have been put in place. So there, very little of this has to do with the guns that you have in your closet. Very little.
Right.
Almost everything has to do with access to information.
Right. Lisa, go ahead.
So I just wanted to address something I saw that Jeff put here. No, it has nothing to do with repealing the Second Amendment. There's no one needs to worry about. The concept of gun control is not gun elimination. The concept of gun control is reducing firearm-related violence, and it's not about taking away the weapons.
Right, Lisa, go ahead.
Because again, as we said earlier, the firearm is a tool. It is at that point that it becomes a weapon. That crossing point. That is where legislatively, morally, and socially we need to examine the issue. And there are a number of different parts of the equation. Some of them have specific relationship to the actual physical tools and weapons. Some have much greater to do with the structure and infrastructure on how you address that issue.
I have got to go, but I want to say to Norman, he asked me a question, do I want death by guns in any way? I have never had to point a weapon at anyone and other than a target, and I hope to never have to do such a thing. But I do have my weapon should it become necessary to protect myself, my family, and my home.
Great.
And I would.
All right, Lisa. So
like I said, I hope
Lisa.
not to use that.
Lisa, I wanted to thank you so much for joining and participating. You did a great job. We'd love to have you back. And if you have to run, we don't want to keep you and have you miss out on your day. So let's definitely be in touch. And Peter, if you want to stick around, we can address some of the we can address some of the comments in the text chat.
Some of these comments.
All right, great. So Lisa, thank you so much, and we'll speak to you soon. Okay, I'll be in touch.
Thank you, Lisa. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, have a good day. Enjoy your day at the range. I guess Jeff, I'm sorry. It was David who commented that the repeal of the Constitutional Amendment. It's not going to happen, and it's totally unnecessary. It exists for a reason. Many of the reasons are still valid. Some of the arguments that are being raised with respect to tyranny and those issues are irrelevant. The need for arms with respect to management of agriculture, the need for arms with respect to the hobbies of hunting and shooting on the range, those are all legitimate needs. Certainly, the Supreme Court Heller decision establishes firmly the principle of self-defense. I think the area that I'm concerned about with respect to the presence of guns is more with the concealed carry, stand your ground perspective. Statistics indicate that in the stand your ground states, there has been no significant change in violent felony crime, and there has been something along the lines of an 8% increase in homicide. So it's sort of counterintuitive that as much as the if you allow me, Rambo image of people with firearms in public, you end up with far more questionable, justifiable homicides. And I believe what will happen at some point in time is somebody will shoot somebody else, and the grounds on which that was done will prove to be inappropriate, and there'll be a case before the Supreme Court which will likely strike down the stand your ground or will greatly address it. My understanding of self-defense in a public setting. You can't shoot somebody for trying to steal your car. You can't shoot somebody for walking up to you that says, "Give me your money," if their hands are empty. If they walk up and, for example, you've got your bottle of soft drink. If they walk up to you and they're holding a bottle in a threatening way, then the question becomes, when does that application of that bottle as a weapon become, and it's a legal question, when does that become a question of lethal force? At what point does it cross that particular Rubicon? And that is where you end up with the justifiable homicide and self-defense. Any other circumstance, and we've got the situation in Florida with the young man and the questions going on around that. That's an unfortunate sequence of events that until it's put before a court, none of us are going to know what specifically happened, and the rumors trailing one side or the other of it. The fact of the matter is that the legal question is, was there a threat of an application of lethal force by what turned out to be the victim of the event? If the court perceives that to be the case, it'll be ruled justifiable homicide. Otherwise, it'll be ruled in some other fashion. Let's see. I noticed, Jeff, you commented about semi-automatic AK-47s. I appreciate your comment that if they're not easily converted, that's fine. I was addressing a more general concern with respect to those items that may be in the market that can be converted. I'm very well aware that a surplus of something in the range of 850,000 M16s that were sold to various countries, South Korea being one of them, are being re-imported under a permit by the State Department into the U.S. for commercial retail use. They have been altered, but can they be altered back? I'm also aware that one of the areas that may affect the problems in Chicago goes back to a 1930s Supreme Court case dealing with the transportation of firearms across state lines. And that may be another avenue by which cities like Chicago can gain some more of an edge on the issues that they're dealing with. It's a pervasive problem in Chicago, to be sure. I am not personally as concerned about the so-called assault weapons. I actually think they're quite silly, and I think the debate surrounding it is quite silly because there's a number of people who envision themselves as Rambo. These things are basically dressed up. They're like cars, right? You have cars that race Formula One, and you have cars that do stock car racing with or drag racing, whatever it is, with various souped-up engines, and then you have cars that look like that, and that's what these are. These are cars that look like that. Unfortunately, they still have a capacity for being lethal, and unfortunately, they seem to be the toys that people want to use when they engage in high-profile stuff. But the fact of the matter is that 60 or 70%, or between 60 and 70% of homicides are committed with handguns. And whether they're automatic or whether they're single shot or semi-automatic is almost irrelevant. And I also want to say that the majority of homicides are not drug related, as much as that's the perception and the argument. From what I've been looking at and seeing, there's certainly a percentage that is. It's around 10 to 15% that drug and gang and various related. A lot of it has to do with people having arguments over money. A good amount of it has to do with intimate domestic murder-suicides. That's a fairly high percentage and various things. But the pro-gun side is absolutely right. The percentage of homicides that are committed with blunt objects, shotguns, and various forms of rifles represent a similar small percentage of the total. So no debate there.
Right.
Are there stats on these straw buyers? No, because the ATF is so limited in its access to information. Although there is my understanding that roughly 40% of the crime guns have been bought in non-background check scenarios. And that a very small possession, less than 20%, have been stolen.
Right. Peter, if you look at Norman submitted a question saying, Norman submitted a question just saying, if it's difficult to convince Lisa, how do you find a solution?
This is Norman's comment here, as good as he is in debate.
No, if you
puts
scroll a
Lisa
little,
on the defensive instead of letting her offer a solution.
Or scroll down a little bit more. Scroll down a little bit more. Norman has another comment.
Okay. I'm not trying to convince Lisa. I'm trying to find common ground between us. I don't think any of this discussion, one way or the other, is to try to convince one party or the other. I think what we're trying to do is lop off the dead wood of idiotic argument. The whole tyranny government argument, which I view as irrelevant because there is no basis in fact for it, and get down to a discussion around the facts. And I think some of the better suggestions have in fact come from the pro-gun side of the equation. I think there's certainly a shrill response, and I understand it, and I'm sympathetic to it, but at the same time, from a moderate perspective, in order to do anything effective, it has to be a discussion between the various elements. And one of the things I'll say, Jeff, I see a number of your comments here, is that the major impediment today is the issue that the various laws, the one that you're referring to here from 1993 and the rest, have been impeded by legislation that has affected the budgeting and financing of those particular departments that are responsible for that. There are the same number of ATF agents today as there were in 1972, and yet there's 2.5 times the number of firearms in the country now. So there's an imbalance that exists that has been imposed upon, if you will, the regulatory and data-based side of this that needs to be lifted enough so that we as a culture can have a meaningful discussion. What are the pro-gun solutions? One of the pro-gun solutions, Norm, was one gentleman had put forth the idea of renewable registration, somewhat similar to your driver's license, that every so many years one had to go back and requalify as an individual. And that struck me, if you again compare it to cars, as a not unreasonable suggestion. Certainly one of the elements of the background check, and one of the reasons why one would perhaps want to have it on gun shows and other uncontrolled sales, is that you have situations of domestic abuse. You have people that have been alcohol use in respect to firearm-related injuries and death is fairly prevalent. In fact, much more so than narcotics. And so, what do we do with people who have been convicted a couple of times on DUIs? Can we somehow address that with various different things? With respect to what's happening with the prison situation, that's an entirely different conversation because the privatization of prisons in the U.S. and the numbers of people that are in prison. There's no question it's a racial crossroad here with respect to crime versus punishment. The majority of homicide victims, a significant number of homicide victims, are young black men under the age of 27, I believe it is, between 14 and 27. However, a significant number of white males are arrested for committing crimes with guns, a much higher percentage, in fact. Yeah, the blacks have a greater probability of being either the victim or the offender in a homicide, and then followed by the Hispanics. But it is Caucasian males that are committing a lot of the other violent crimes that fall under felony violent crimes. But the prison population is disproportionately black and Hispanic, and that's a racial issue that has plagued the U.S. for a long time, and it will take time for it to rectify itself. But it is something that needs to be addressed separately. What is Gabby asking? Yes, I do agree that it's important to put a director in charge of the ATF and to stop impeding that process. And yes, more funding is absolutely necessary to rectify that.
All right, great. I mean, Peter, if anyone else has any questions, obviously we can hang tight. What I was just going to tell you is, in a little while I'll be going anyway, unless if you have anything that you have to get done, I'll be going shortly anyway, just because we have a discussion regarding Syria taking place at 12, but I got to get some people's cameras set up properly, obviously. So. I hope you enjoyed your experience, and I guess what I would ask you is, what sort of role do you think a platform like Vonvo can play in a topic such as gun control? Because we've had so many discussions on foreign issues in the Middle East, and now we're trying to bring it back home with some domestic concerns, and just in terms of like the role the media plays in this topic, and what kind of Vonvo's looking to foster in terms of real people having these sorts of discussions. What do you think this sort of platform can help accomplish?
Well, I think that premise right there, the idea of real people having these discussions, is where the value is in this, because I think you have the advantage, Max, in that you've done a fair number of these, and at some point you're going to have a sense of who the various real people commentators are that may be able to address the issue and gain a higher profile for what you're doing here with Vaughn, as well as have a meaningful discussion. We've meandered here a little bit today because that's the nature of this kind of conversation, but you may at a future date be able to do a much more structured conversation over a sequence of actual proposals and the merits for and against, as almost a live survey of the event. I think it's important for the larger media to eventually get a sense of this. I mean, I realize at present we're still this is a fairly small forum. I think it's an effective forum because there's Lisa. She's a perfectly reasonable individual who has a passion for and wants to protect her ownership of her firearms. And I go back to my original concept here that in my mind, the conversation is not about firearms as tools, because I recognize and accept that fact, but it is at that point where they transition into weapons, that how do we address that? And I think that discussion in itself is meaningful. I think the benefit of this particular forum is it puts a face to, or faces to, the art, because you can read this stuff. We get the Lapierres making their public statements that are basically closed arguments. We get the politicians doing their positioning, trying to read the public mind. This is the public mind, and I think that's the value of what you're putting forward, is that it is reflection of the public. It's a reflection of the mood. It's reflected in the questions and comments below. Obviously, it's going to tilt one way or the other depending on who's comes from where on the site, but it certainly has merit. And I think that the more you promote that, because again, when I sat in last week and listened to the three gentlemen last week, they started to actually broach some interesting concepts between their divergent views. And that's the kind of discussion that needs to take place.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. All right, no, it's just because we were just, I was just personally curious with, this sort of domestic topic. But, how does this sound? Let's, definitely plan to obviously be in touch. Thank you so much for appearing. I think it was a great discussion and shows, what can really take place with, people on different sides of the spectrum. And overall, I think people who watch this will find it very informative. And if we can do it again with yourself, Lisa, anyone else, I'm confident we can continue the dialogue.
It would be my pleasure. I certainly enjoyed it as well. And I want to thank the few folks whose names I see here on the side for taking the time to listen to us as well. And Norman, certainly specifically for some of your comments, just because they point the conversation in a direction. So that's great. Appreciate it as well.
Right. And
so thank you, Max.
yeah, and I was just going to say, we have this Facebook group now that we're going to be using, so everyone can kind of connect inside of the group. I'll write down if you want to put down your last name so that we can continue to make these connections, and then do it inside the group, and then set up discussions going forward. That would make a lot of sense, I think. And Gabby, if you haven't joined the group, Gabby, friend. I don't know if we're friends on Facebook, so Gabby, if you want to friend me, that's my name, and then I can give you some more info on Vonvo and invite you into the group. Let's just continue spreading the word about our platform if everyone's fine with that.
Okay.
All right. Thanks so much, Peter. Speak to you soon.
Take care, Max. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening.
Bye-bye.